we've been given a title, Can We Bring the Hospital to an Injured Patient? So hospital to roadside, what does that look like? And I think the best way Anne and I thought about describing this is what it looks like a day in the life of London's Air Ambulance and how we actually make that happen. So London's Air Ambulance, what does it actually consist of? So we have one advanced trauma team that's from 7 in the morning, 7 at night, and then the night team take over. And from a Monday to Saturday, we have one late shift, which is called medic free. So the car starts at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we have 2 hours protected training time, which is really important. And we'll go into what the team cover in those 2 hours up until midnight. So the clinical team, so the paramedics, all the paramedics are experienced. So for a paramedic to apply to us, they have to have gone through their whole paramedic training with an ambulance service. And then they have to be with the London Ambulance Service working full time, and they have to be registered with the Healthcare Professions Council for a minimum of 5 years before they can even apply to be in post. So a lot of experience there. Part of their role, 50% of the rota, they will work in the dispatch centre. That's the emergency operations centre, which I'll go into a little bit more detail shortly. And what that involves is trying to find the critically ill and injured patients in order to send the team to. And the 50% of their rota involves being clinical, and it's the paramedic with London's Air Ambulance that does the emergency response driving when they're not in the helicopter. And do you want to just touch on the doctors?
Yeah, nice to meet you all. The doctors come from all over the world. So where the paramedics are recruited from within the London Ambulance Service, we recruit the doctors who literally, a lot of them have wanted their whole medical career to come and work with London's Air Ambulance. So we've had doctors from America, Canada, Scandinavia, Australia. So any point in time, about 50% of our team are doctors from other countries, which is very helpful because we learn lots of things from their services as well. We're all qualified in hospital medicine. So when you're thinking about the question that the lecture's asking, all of us have worked in a hospital. We're all fully competent in our specialty. And we normally, in our sort of normal day jobs, we look after people in the hospital. But when we're working with the air ambulance, we're taking those skills out onto the street. Most of us have got qualifications in emergency medicine, which used to be called A&E or casualty, but it's where you go if you don't know what's wrong with you and you're scared and you think you're going to die. Or anaesthesia, which is obviously giving people a general anaesthetic to have operations. That might be an ordinary operation like having ankle surgery or something, or it might be having an emergency operation if something goes wrong inside you. And critical care is the intensive care unit. So we have doctors who are fully qualified in hospital medicine who are good at all of those things. All of us are able to do a bit of everything, and the skills that we all have we'll talk a bit about later. But the doctors and the paramedics working together is what makes this a really well experienced and well-skilled team, so that we work really closely together. Or I should say the doctors come to work for us for 6 months full-time, and the paramedics come to work with us for 12 months. So nearly every month we've got a new doctor and a new paramedic working with us. And the consultants like myself, we work full-time for the service, but we only do 1 day a week. Because what you'll see by the end of this talk is actually the type of things we go to are pretty unusual. The patients are really severely injured, and if you did this sort of work every day of your life, you would probably find that it troubled you or caused you to burn out. So full-time doctors for 6 months, and then part-time when you become a consultant.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. And yeah, and on the paramedics come to us for 12 months, as Anne said. But at the moment, we're developing a program where some of the paramedics, we'll be looking up to about 50% of the paramedics will be with us permanently. So they'll be coming level 7 education. So they'll be trained up to master's level in resuscitation with QMUL. And the majority of paramedics that actually applied to us have all got a minimum of BSc in paramedic science. A lot of them now have master's degrees as well. So the actual profession itself is becoming very academic. We have 2 transport platforms to get to the patient. We have a helicopter, as I'm sure some of you may or may not have seen or heard. And we have the car. So for the aircraft itself, we can only fly in daylight hours. You may have seen on TV, you may have seen other air ambulances that fly at night with night vision goggles, etc. For us in London, the biggest issue for us is getting to the patients in the daytime because of the traffic. There's not really a need for us to fly at night because clearly the roads are much clearer, and there's so much risk with overhead cables, lampposts, etc., that are very, very difficult to see at night. So we tend to fly in daylight hours, and our goal is to be airborne, i.e. the helicopter actually lifting off the helipad within 4 minutes. So as soon as that klaxon, a loud alarm goes off on the helipad that signals we've got a job, everyone will run up to the helicopter as quick as we can to get that aircraft in the air and try and get overhead of the scene. Well, once we go overhead, we'll have a quick view of the scene to see what we can see. And we're looking for pertinent things such as who's on scene, are the ambulance service already on scene? If not, we may need to bring different equipment to the patient. Are the police there, more importantly? So if it's comes on a serious assault, we need to make sure the police are there and the scene's safe before obviously landing the helicopter and approaching that patient. So there's a lot of things. If it's a major incident, we can look at things of how we get in, how we get out of that scene. So there's a lot of things we can look at from overhead. And on occasion, if it's a very, very busy scene, we will ask the pilots to keep flying around to give us a view of exactly what's going on to try and get as much information as possible. The landing site selection, it's surprisingly quite tight. So what we need to land in is something called 2D. So that's twice the diameter of the aircraft, okay? The pilots are very, very experienced and they'll know, for instance, if we get a call now to near Trafalgar Square, they'll know exactly where they have landed previously. So they'll go overhead and look for those places. But the trouble is, as you well know, other things may happen. There may be road works, there may be, if it's Christmas time, there may be like markets over there. So obviously we can't land there. So they're overhead, site selection, and want to make sure it's safe and make sure there's no debris that's going to fly around any overhead cable. So safety is absolute paramount. And then we need to find out, or rather get an idea of exactly where we're landing and how close we are to that patient. Sometimes we can land right next to the patient, we get out of the helicopter, a short run, and we're there. Sometimes it can be up to maybe a mile away, because depending on how built up the area is. And if that's the case, sometimes we get the ambulance service or the police to pick us up. We'll start making our way, and then we radio control the control room and tell them basically which roads we're running down. And the police are fantastic. They normally try and come and pick us up to speed up our journey. Aircraft versus car, how do we decide? So the missions are exactly the same. The kit we carry on the helicopter and the car is exactly the same. So this isn't patient dependent. This is all about where it is and the time of day. So if it's a beautiful, bright, sunny day, and obviously, if a patient was to get critically injured in Whitechapel, we'd be going by car for obvious reasons, because by the time we get in the helicopter lift, it's going to be far quicker to get our lift down, jump in the car and drive to it. So we have a footprint area within London where we know historically it's going to be far quicker to get in the car and drive to that patient. And weather. So rain isn't an issue. Wind, anything above like 40 knots, that would probably stop us flying. But the biggest issue for us is low cloud and visibility. The call signs we've got is Medic 1, so that's the day team. That runs from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. So again, we'll go by air and go by car, weather dependent, time independent. And Medic 2 tends to be the night shift. So that's 7 o'clock in the evening till 7 o'clock in the morning. Clearly that's by car because of the daylight. And then Medic 3, as I mentioned, is the late turn car. In the summer, and Medic 3, because the aircraft goes offline a lot later because of the summer hours, we'll tend to use the aircraft for a couple of hours before going into car up till midnight. And then we've got an ECAT car, which I'll touch on briefly in a few slides' time. So London Ambulance Service, so all our paramedics are recruited from London Ambulance Service, and clearly we work within Greater London, we've worked within the M25, and the ambulance service that we partner with is the London Ambulance Service. We do, on occasion, go outside of the M25, and on occasion, other air ambulances do come in to us. We've got a very, very good relationship with neighbouring air ambulances. So London Ambulance Service, the busiest ambulance service in the world, okay? We cover over 620 square miles with a population over 9 million, that's residents. So you've got to think about visitors and workers, and that goes over the transit population over 10 million people within London. So very, very busy, very, very built up. We take in over 6,000 calls per day, and although all these calls are taken in, over 50% of those, so over 3,000 ambulance journeys, 999 blue light journeys per day in London. That's absolutely incredible. If you think about the logistics of that alone, absolutely incredible. If you think 6,000 calls per day and the person in the control room is trying to find the most critically injured patient out of those, And on average, we're taking five of those calls a day that our trauma teams are getting sent to. It's a very, very impressive task and a very, very difficult task. This is the control room. So this is based at Waterloo. Some of you may know it, some of you may have travelled past it. So one of the HEMS paramedics that's on secondment or with us works in there 50% of their rota, and it's covered every day, every night. And London was the first ever air ambulance to have what we call clinical dispatch. That's a paramedic, a HEMS paramedic, to sift through every single call. Prior to that, it was down on non-clinical dispatch. So a call would come in, and the call would sound very serious. For instance, Oxford Street, somebody unconscious lying in front of a bus. And lots of calls come in, aircraft would lift, and you get sent to it, and the patient's tripped over or they're drunk lying in the road. Okay, because they can't, if you're not clinically trained, you can't actually interject on the call and ask questions and find out any more details. So clinical dispatch is absolutely imperative to what we do, and I'll go into a little more detail. So we're searching for the critically injured and on occasion critically unwell, i.e. medically unwell. About 12% of their workload are medically unwell patients, and the majority of those are requests from the London Ambulance Service. Within the London Ambulance Service, they get paramedics, and then they have what's called critical care paramedics or advanced paramedic practitioners. And majority of our requests for those are for patients that are so unwell that they're unable to deal with it, and they request us. And the majority of our intervention for that is to give the patient a general anaesthetic at the roadside. It's normally a patient who has unfortunately had a cardiac arrest, a period of resuscitation has been carried out, and they've got the heart going, the patient's breathing, but they need to be anaesthetised to stabilise them. That's the majority of our medically unwell patients. Major incident, so we'll go to any major incident. We're basically commissioned to have 4 cars or four medical teams for any major incidents going on in London, and it's impressive how quick the teams can come together. So clinician dispatch, as I just spoke to. So this is going to give you an idea. Has anyone heard of Good Sam? Has anyone got it on their phone? Good, so you've got it on your phone, excellent. So Good Sam's fantastic. So it's twofold. So part of Good Sam is you can have it on your phone. If you're trained in, you don't even have to have any level of training for CPR, because once you go to the patient, you'll dial 999 and they will give you instructions of how to do chest compression. So basically the way this started was, if someone was to unfortunately collapse into a cardiac arrest, it would flag people that are signed up to the Good Sam app. If you're willing to help, you'd get an alert and you'd go to that patient and you would start resuscitation. And if there's an AED, i.e. like a public defibrillator, they would tell you where it was, and they would try and get that to the patient. And it's been proven to save a lot of lives because it's all about the chain of survival. And this has advanced now so that we've got a video link. So has anyone got experience? Has anyone ever had to been sent a Good Sam link by anybody? Okay, so you have, Steve. Say again? Yeah, on the paramedic assessment, yeah. So what happens is, if, let's say there's an accident down the road and lots of people are calling up to say somebody's been hit by a car, the paramedic in the control room, sometimes you're listening and it's very, very obvious. You have multiple calls to say this patient's hit by a car, the windscreen of the car's broken, the patient's unconscious, the patient's snoring. Immediately, the team are going to get sent, okay? So that's easy, sending the team. But what we found is there's a period of time between identifying what's happened to that patient and an intervention being carried out. It's not just about what we provide with an expensive helicopter, expensive kit, highly trained doctors, paramedics. It's about what's done until we get there, and that is really, really important. So what the paramedic in the control room can do, he or she will contact the caller, and they will speak to them and say, are you happy for me to send a link to your phone and access your camera? So if it's a yes, they send the link, and then what happens is the person, the call taker, or rather the caller, will point the camera at the patient, and they can see it from the control room. They can see exactly what's going on, and they can give medical advice to help that patient, okay? And it's been proven. So London Ambulance Service have used, since Good Sam's come in, over 2.5 million times. The rest of the world put together, I've only used it 1.5 million times. So London Ambulance Service alone are the biggest users of Good Sam since it's starting the video link. And it's absolutely fantastic for what it can provide. this is, I'm just going to play some audio from a Good Sam. There's no video. So in real life, there was a video, but I just want to play the audio. I think it's extremely powerful. All right. This is interrogation. This is one of our paramedics who was in the control room, and a call came in to say that a patient on a motorcycle has hit a tree, and they think he's unconscious. Okay. Let me see if I can. Just want to get to the right bit.
Yeah, put your hand inside the helmet and hold his face. Yeah. Inside the helmet.
That's it. Hold the cheeks on the inside of his face, and then I need the person above his head, that's it, to take his helmet off, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
That's going really well. Yeah, going really well. Okay, great. Good job, guys. That's perfect. Okay. Can you see if he responds? Is he talking to you?
He's not really responsive.
Okay. All right. So take that out from underneath his head.
Yeah.
Take it. Whatever that black thing is. Take it out. And now what I need you to do. Okay. The person with the green. So the person with the green jumper on. Okay. I need you to put your thumbs on. So listen to me. Put your thumbs on his cheekbones. That's it. And then the corner of his jaw with your index finger and your middle finger. Pull his jaw to the sky.
Put him this way. There's a policewoman there.
Okay. So can I just let me talk to the police officer? Yeah. So police officer, can you hear me? My name's Kieran. I'm just a hand desk. Can you do a jaw thrust? So just put your thumbs on his cheekbones. Yeah. Put your thumbs up. Yeah, that's good. All right. Just hold. So put your thumbs on his cheekbones, so just in front of his eyes for me.
So what's happened here is the motorcyclist has hit a tree. The motorcycle has flipped over on top of the patient. The patient is deeply unconscious. Okay, patient's got his crash helmet on, and everyone's scared to move, obviously, the patient in case they've got a neck injury. And the ambulance service have clearly been flagged. Our paramedic Kieran has listened to this, and he spoke to the people on scene, and he's now using the video conference call with Good Sam, and what he can see is the patient lying there under the motorcycle, and he can hear the patient snoring. So the patient's got an occluded airway. Okay, so if you think if the patient's got a brain injury, it's really, really important to get as much oxygen into that brain as possible. So patient's unconscious, the first thing that all the reflexes, obviously within the patient's airway, are going to relax. So they start snoring, they start occluding the airway. Okay, which can and will be fatal if somebody doesn't step in. So the paramedic has got members of the public, and bear in mind this is on a tape line, so occasionally when we do it, we ask them to take the helmet off, and people say, I'm scared to move the helmet in case I break the patient's neck. And we will say to them, this is a taped line, I take full responsibility for this, please take the patient's helmet off. And this is what happened. Obviously, I've just given you a snapshot. They've taken the patient's helmet off, and the paramedic now is instructing them to open the patient's airway. Okay, and that's what they've done, open the patient's airway, kept the patient's airway open, just with a jaw thrust, until the ambulance service arrived. So, instructed to move a patient away from the motorbike, identified the patient as unconscious. This is all via the video link. Okay, guided members of the public to remove the helmet, identified the patient's airway as actually being obstructed, and then instructed members of the public how to open the patient's airway with a jaw thrust. So, if that wasn't done, within about 3 to 5 minutes, that patient unfortunately would have stopped breathing, gone into cardiac arrest, and by the time the ambulance service, that would have been irreversible cardiac arrest. So HEMS obviously got sent to this patient, air ambulance, sorry, so HEMS is, you may have heard HEMS or London's Air Ambulance, so HEMS stands for Helicopter Emergency Medical Service. You may hear LAA, London's Air Ambulance, or HEMS, it's the same thing. So the HEMS assessment found out that the patient was unconscious on their arrival, the airway was at risk, i.e. they were having to manually keep that airway open. Patient had massive facial injuries and chest injuries as well. The treatment they provided, so they adequately packaged the patients, any fractures they splinted, and they carried out what's called an RSI, a rapid sequence induction. That's a general anaesthetic at the roadside. That's to protect the patient's airway, take over their breathing, and try and obviously oxygenate them as best as possible. And then they took the patient to a major trauma centre, which we'll touch on, and we'll touch on briefly. The patient outcomes, the patient, without going into detail, the patient's got massive facial fractures, massive facial injuries, he's got a chest injury, and the scapula, so shoulder blade fractured, and the patient was discharged home 6 days later. That's absolutely incredible, just from that one intervention alone. So it just gives you an idea of how effective having that clinician in the control room is so important. So if that wasn't a paramedic in the control room, you're not actually allowed to intervene on a call and give medical advice. It's only the paramedics that can do that. Very, very important. So readiness. So how do we prepare for these kind of missions? How are we ready? So all our drugs are prepared. They're all pre-checked, drawn up, ready to go. So other our ambulance services that aren't as busy as ours, when they get to scene, they'll tend to drop the drugs they need. But for our service, it's so busy, we know pretty much we're going to use them, and we need to have them ready to hand as quick as possible. So drugs are prepared. All our bags here you can see. So this one here, sorry, the colour's not fantastic. So this one here is what's called our shock bag. In there we carry blood, we carry surgical equipment, and we carry blood warming. So we try not to give any blood cold, so we try and warm it up to about 36 degrees. This one here is called our monitor bag, where we carry monitor, we carry all our drugs, our medical equipment bag, which is stuff for securing the airway, dressings, etc., all our sort of daily use. And without going into the detail, there's other sort of stuff in the back for a BOA, which we'll touch on. And this is exactly the same kit, as I mentioned earlier, that's carried in the helicopter as well. Quite a lot of kit to take to sea when there's just two of you. We can vouch for that, can't we? When it's a long run. So as mentioned earlier, these are the kind of drugs we tend to draw up and have to hand. Every single day starts with a briefing. So we'll have a very quick brief in the morning with each other on the car before the helicopter comes in. So the team will be ready from about 6:30, ready to take over. And then we'll have a quick handover from the night team and any issues, any missing kit, what do we need, etc. And also check on well-being if they have a busy night, if they need any support. And then once a helicopter comes in, comes in about around 8 o'clock because they have what's called a check-A. They've got a lot of checks to do. They're based out of Norfolk, so they've got a lot of legal checks they can do before they actually lift the helicopter into us. Then they tend to be on the roof about 8 o'clock. Once the helicopter's there, then we'll have what's called a brief. So we'll talk about the weather, talk about welfare, talk about any issues. So let's say, for instance, any road closures. If there's protests going on in central London, we need to be aware of it because it's going to affect where we can land. Or is there any risk to us, for instance, depending on what the protests are about, that kind of stuff. So a lot of stuff to talk about on a daily basis. Future planning, look in the diary, have we got any visits, and roles and responsibilities. So if I'm on training a trainee paramedic or Anne's on training a trainee doctor, we'll look at what their education plan is for the day in order to get them through what we call a sign-off period to get them ready to fly solo. So training, aside from the actual training itself to get up to speed into a sign-off position to go solo, we have regular training called core skills. So this is where we'll identify learning. It could be around pediatrics, it could be around ventilations, it could be around major hemorrhage. And the Institute of Pre-Hospital Care, fantastic. So they help us set these up, and they'll just be training packages, normally last a half day to a whole day on the helipad regularly. Scenarios, or moulage, you may have heard them called. So it's really, really important. We'll have mannequins, and we'll have a set scenario that a patient's injured, and we have to treat those. So you have a very experienced doctor and paramedic leading it. And we all get involved as faculty and also as the kind of people taking part in it as well. And we all tend to try for high acuity, low occurrence activities, things like surgical airway, where you may have to cut into the front of someone's neck. It's something that is very, very rare, so very low occurrence, but when you have to do it, it's very, very high acuity, so you have to be very sharp and know exactly what you're doing. Challenging environments, so we work around challenging environments. I think probably the most challenging environment for us, but London's Air Ambulance, is probably around the rail network. Specifically the underground network, less so with the overground because clearly you can have access around the carriage, but unfortunately if someone's gone underneath a train, then one of us will have to go under the train to help treat that patient. Okay, so it's very challenging. We do a lot of training with network rail with the underground staff. Individual competencies, so that's to get an individual through their actual sign-off period. And also experienced staff as well. So there may be some procedures, especially the halo procedures that you haven't gone through for quite a period of time. And it's important as an experienced member of staff that you recognise that in yourself and you highlight that and you make sure that you go through the adequate training to get back up to speed. Team performance, obviously critical. We have a lot of stuff now around team performance, how we can perform better. And then regularly we have what's called case review meetings. So on every Tuesday, every Thursday of the week, we will go through, so this will be consultant-led, and we'll review the cases of any learning points, any difficult cases. If a clinician attends a patient and finds it particularly difficult, they may want to bring it forward for a case review meeting so that a more senior team can look into it and ensure that learning spread through the whole service. So this is one of our scenarios or moulages. You can see, obviously, plastic mannequin. We tend not to use very high fidelity mannequins because the experienced faculty can really kind of turn the pressure up just on a normal mannequin by feeding into that, and it's very, very effective. Far cheaper and less easy to break.
Thanks, Dean. I'm just going to take you back one slide. So, do you think this photo is a real job, or do you think it's a training scenario? Hands up if you think it's a real job. Hands up if you think it's a training scenario. Okay, it is a training scenario. But I think the only reason you can tell is because Chrissy is standing there. Actually, it's an iPad, but it looks like a clipboard in her hand. Now, this is a training program we put on at a disused underground station, because one of the things, as Dean says, we do is we have to treat people who've sadly been hit by trains. Sometimes that's because they've deliberately put themselves, they've thrown themselves under the train. Sometimes it's because people have fallen or tripped and ended up under the train. But it's not that unusual for us to have to help these patients. If you imagine what it's like as a doctor who's only ever worked in a hospital, or a paramedic who normally is treating people sort of in their homes or on the street, to have to go underneath a train and then look after somebody, that's very different to the normal medicine you do. So when we're talking about taking the hospital to the patient, we're not just doing that, but we're also training the team to work in a very different environment. So we train the doctors and paramedics about what it's going to be like to go underneath the train in your full kit and try and deliver medicine that normally you'd do in a hospital with bright lights and lots of people around to help you. So this is a training scenario. We've got some of our real doctors and paramedics. We've also got some students in there helping us. They're acting. And it's amazing actually how much you learn by just being in that environment, listening to the conversation. And the paramedic at the back, who's sort of got his hands on his hips, he's one of our real paramedics. And to me, he looks like he's properly in the zone. So this scenario is quite effective because they're all thinking and imagining that there's a real patient here, but actually it's a plastic mannequin. But this is really important for what we do. So as Dean said, we spend quite a lot of our time when we're not actually on calls, but training, getting ready, making sure that we're the best possible team that we can be to look after patients. And this is the case review meeting. We call it D&D, or death and disability. Some hospitals have M&M meetings, which is morbidity and mortality. As he said, this is a full case discussion where we talk about the whole case from the moment that the 999 comes into the ambulance service right through to the time we deliver the patient to hospital. And we look at what happened to the patient afterwards. We're trying to work out, did we get the diagnosis right? Did we give the right treatment? Did we stick to our standard operating procedures? So we have guidelines for how we should deliver the medical care, and we're very consistent in what we do. The benefit of that, it means that pretty much any doctor who's trained by us and any paramedic can work together without knowing each other particularly well, but we all know the same policies and we will operate in the same way. And we're looking for ways we can improve our care, that we can get better at delivering medical care. Ultimately, that means hopefully we save more lives and have better outcomes for patients. So everything we've talked about now, up to now, is Dean's explained how we get the job, how the paramedic dispatches us, what we spend our time on the helipad doing. But as he said, 5 to 6 times a day, sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average 6 times a day, we will go on a mission. So as soon as the klaxon goes, it's a loud klaxon, we stop everything. We just go straight to the helicopter or straight to the car. And then we're thinking about the patient straight away. We get given one line of information that will usually say something like cyclist versus van or central chest stabbing, unconscious. And from that moment, we start to think about what has happened to the patient, what injuries might they have, what might we have to do. In my case, if we land in the helicopter, I'm usually thinking, where are we? And that is important because I want to know where is the nearest hospital, and not just the nearest hospital, but the major trauma centre. So some of you will know there's different hospitals that have different capabilities and skills. The Royal London is a major trauma centre. For example, Newham and Whipps Cross are trauma units, and there's a difference in skill and capability. So the major trauma centres have every specialty you might need 24/7 to look after very severely injured patients. The trauma units can look after you for a short period of time if you're less severely injured, but they won't have the full capability and they won't have that 24/7. So we will make the decision about which hospital they go to. And for our patients, almost without exception, they need to go to a major trauma centre. So when we get a mission, what we actually do is it's not just about doing medicine, it's about working out what's wrong with the patient. And we do that by something called interpretation of the mechanism. That allows us to work out what energy has been transferred to the patient. So if you think about somebody who might have fallen from a height, let's say they've fallen, think of an example, someone who's fallen off a ladder, they're putting their Christmas decorations back in the loft, but they've fallen all the way down the ladder, so they've fallen, let's say, 10, 12 feet, and they've landed on a hard floor at the bottom. By the position they land in, how far they've fallen, we can try and predict what injuries they've got, and that's before we even touch the patient. Then we examine the patient, and we examine them what we call top to toe. We're looking for every injury, but particularly we're looking for injuries that might kill the patient or cause them to have lifelong problems. We also do that in an order called ABC, which you will have heard of. And for the type of patients we go to, we put a big C right at the front, which means catastrophic hemorrhage. So we're thinking about, are they bleeding massively from somewhere? Is their airway obstructed? Can they breathe properly? Have they got a good circulation? And then D is disability. And we go through that in a very systematic way. And that's to pick up the injuries. Once we think we've worked out what injuries they've got, we then have to think about what needs doing. And then we do them in an order, setting the highest priority first. And then our job is to create a team. So in a hospital, you'll have a full trauma team. Everyone's got an apron on. Everyone knows what they're doing. In pre-hospital, we haven't met most of these people before. Dean and I would know each other. We might know a couple of the ambulance crew, but that might not be enough people to look after the patient. So we use police officers. We sometimes use bystanders to do very simple tasks. We'll use the fire brigade. And we create what you call a flash team, which is like people suddenly coming together to treat this patient. So we might give you instructions to say, can you help me? Can you just hold on to this? Or can you hold this drip? Or can you pull that leg straight? Because we don't have a full team like you would in a hospital. But we can still deliver really good care. As Dean said, if you can give really good instructions and give the appropriate task to the right people, that can be very effective. The other thing we do is most of the patients that we go to have a time-critical injury. It might be a brain injury where the brain is expanding and they need to get to hospital to have an operation. It could be they're bleeding, they're losing blood and we can't stop the hemorrhage without an operation. Most of our patients need us to work quickly and effectively, so we inject pace. So we tell the ambulance crew, this patient is really sick, we're really worried, we think they've ruptured their spleen, they need to be in an operating theatre, you need to help us go fast. So we give them that energy and we support them to move more quickly. We also deliver some very advanced procedures. So London's Air Ambulance has some world firsts, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we deliver care that is an additional layer to the ambulance service. So the London Ambulance Service is, as Dean said, busiest ambulance service in the world. They have excellent resources. They have motorbikes, pedal cycles, specialist hazardous area response teams. They offer excellent service. But because of their paramedic license, they can't do some things which doctors are allowed to do. So, for example, they can't do operations. They can't do open chest surgery. At the moment, they don't deliver blood transfusions, and they can't give emergency anaesthetics. So when we arrive, we add an additional layer of care, which is effectively taking some parts of the hospital, such as the emergency room, the operating theatre, or the intensive care unit, to the roadside so we can deliver time-critical interventions more quickly. And then we stay with that team, with the ambulance crews, and we take the patient to hospital. Sometimes we just assist them and say, yep, you're good, you've done everything right, we can help you a bit, and then you take the patient to hospital, and that leaves us free, or what we call green, to be available for another patient. And as I said, we will most of the time, we will escort the patient to the major trauma centre. Most of the time we go by ambulance. Sometimes if we are far out on the edges of Greater London, we would use the helicopter to get back into central London. But really the helicopter helps us get to the patients quickly, and a few patients get carried back to hospital by air, but not many. So this is from a few years ago, but reminds you that in London, because of the population density, actually lots of things happen every single day. This made the front page of the Evening Standard several years ago, but if you think about this, 2 female cyclists killed in one day, not just injured, but they had such bad injuries they died. And actually we looked after both of those patients on the same day. This isn't one of them, but this is a young lady called Vicky who was also a cyclist. Some of you might have seen An Hour to Save Your Life a few years ago, and Vicky was a patient that was featured. Now, if I ask you just to look at the colour of Vicky, and if you look at I think he's a police officer, if you look at his arm, what do you notice about Vicky? She's extremely pale, exactly. I don't know if you're medical, but I think some people are not medical. But even if you're not medical, you can see that Vicky is extremely pale. That's because she is bleeding to death. So what happened to Vicky? She was a cyclist, she was turning left, and actually an HGV knocked her over and went over her pelvis. Dean was actually one of the paramedics who looked after her. Her blood pressure was 50. Now, most of you have probably got blood pressures that are somewhere between 90 and 150. Okay, the top number should definitely be above 80, really. But Vicky's top number of her blood pressure was 50, which is really low. She was just about able to talk and tell the paramedics and the HEMS team what her name was. But because the lorry had gone over her pelvis, all of the bones were shattered. But not just that, where the lorry went over, it tore the arteries, it tore the veins, and her left leg was very badly injured as well. And she was literally dying. The helicopter team went to her, and in fact, she had 2 HEMS teams looking after her. And we had to do some pretty serious interventions to save her. Now, this happened in Clerkenwell, which is not very far from the Royal London Hospital. But if the HEMS team hadn't gone to Vicky, she would have died on the way to the hospital, despite the best efforts of the ambulance service. So her story really explains why it's so important that we can take the hospital to the patient, because some patients haven't got enough time and they won't survive until the hospital. Unfortunately, we also go to a lot of stabbings. So about 25% of the patients we go to are victims of penetrating trauma. A small number have been shot, which is frightening, but most of them are actually stabbings. And unfortunately, we spend most of our evenings actually going to these jobs. And when we go to these patients, we wear stab vests to protect us in case somebody is trying to hurt other people. But this is unfortunately a common thing we go to. So I was talking about what we do at the jobs. Now, the things in red, the clinical examination and the advanced care, are medical things which you have to train to do at medical school or through your paramedic training. But importantly, the other things we have to do on scene are provide leadership. We use our experience from working in hospital, and we have to communicate really effectively, because otherwise that team just won't work well together. If we don't give good instructions or explain why we're doing something, if we're not experienced enough to recognise the injuries, and if we don't lead that team well, things don't go as well. And sometimes that's what we learn when we review the cases. So the pictures on the left give you an idea. I talked about interpreting mechanism of injury. So the top picture shows you something that would have been similar to Vicky's injury. You can see there's a very bent pedal bike, and you can see there's a very big heavy goods vehicle next to her. If you just imagine how that happened, and that bike going over, the lorry going over not just the bike, but going over a body, you can imagine the damage that it causes. And then when you see the patient in front of you, you can start to work out what injuries they've got and what you need to do. Equally, the picture at the bottom, you can just about see there's a motorbike that has gone into the side of a car. And you can fully imagine that whether you are the motorbike rider or the driver of the car, you're going to be very badly injured. So there's things we learn about. You know certain bits of the car have different strengths, and if you hit certain bits of the car, some of the car is designed to take that impact. So bonnets are designed so that if you go up to them, you slide over them a little bit on some cars. And if you hit certain very rigid bits of the car, you're more likely to be injured. So we get trained on how to look at that and interpret what might have happened to the patient. So once we've interpreted what we think is wrong, we've examined the patient, we then have to decide what procedures we're going to do. Emergency anaesthesia is putting somebody to sleep. And we do this for different reasons. We might do it if the patient's airway is blocked, and that could be due to a burn, it could be due to bleeding, or it could be the patient is in such severe pain, or they have such bad injuries that we think that is the humanitarian thing to do for them, or it could be because all of their ribs are broken and they can't actually breathe for themselves, so we would take over. We also provide blood, and we do that about once a day. We give an anaesthetic about once a day. Blood transfusion is obviously if you've lost a lot of blood, we need to replace that, and that's why it's important to donate blood. So if any of you haven't donated blood but are able to, please do. We use O negative blood, which is the blood type we could give to anybody in this room, male or female, regardless of your age. It's safe to give, and it's very precious. But we carry 8 units on the helicopter, 8 units on every car, and that allows us to give patients life-saving volume, which will keep them alive until they get to hospital. And we started doing that in 2012. We were the first air ambulance in the United Kingdom to actually deliver that intervention to patients. And we do that about 150 times a year. We also have other ways of controlling hemorrhage. So some of you will have done first aid courses where you're taught to put direct pressure on, to elevate the limb, to put a very tight bandage on. All of those skills are really important. And we do simple things like that when we need to. We also have the ability to pack wounds with a very special gauze that helps support clotting. We carry tourniquets, which the police also carry, and the ambulance service to stop arterial bleeding. And then we have some very special procedures which are advanced and actually can only be delivered by doctors. They're called REBOA and thoracotomy. All of this has to be done quickly, which is why we train so hard. I'm just going to talk briefly about another team that we have that's called ECAT. And they were launched last year, but they're really going to get going this year, and it's quite exciting. It's called the Endovascular Cardiac Arrest Team. And this is something that London's Air Ambulance have done in collaboration with the team from Barts. And it's a mixture, again, of emergency physicians, intensive care doctors and anaesthetists with paramedics, and particularly with the advanced paramedics, the London Ambulance Service. This is not about trauma, but this is about cardiac arrest. So when someone's heart stops, we need to restart their heart. So the Good Sam app sends people to go and do CPR to early defibrillation. But despite doing that, some patients won't come out of ventricular fibrillation, which means they're going to die if we can't correct that. There is a possibility, though, that if you can put a patient onto something called ECMO, which is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, and what that means is you take the blood out of the patient that's coming out of veins, you put oxygen into it with a pump and a machine, and then you put it back into the patient so that it gives oxygen to their brain and their heart and their organs, and you do that until the heart recovers. And sometimes that's until you've opened up a cardiac vessel that's blocked from a myocardial infarction. So this team has the potential to increase the survival from heart attacks from less than 10% to over 40%. So we've now got a team doing that, and Dean's one of the paramedics who works on that team, and they will be going out around London trying to select the right patients where we can deliver this intervention, which is normally only done in a hospital, but the machine now is small enough for us to carry in the car or on the helicopter. And this will be, hopefully, a game-changing intervention that will be delivered, well, it's already being delivered across London, but will be done on a more regular basis. But just going back to the trauma patient, so this is an example of one of our teams. You can see they've got a unit of packed red blood cells there. Packed red blood cells carry oxygen, and obviously you want that circulating when a patient is injured. And we've also done a trial called the SWIFT trial, which is about whole blood. Now, when you go and donate blood, you are giving red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and clotting factors. And you need all of those things to clot when you're a trauma patient. So if you just give them packed cells, they carry oxygen, but they're not as good as the blood that the patient has lost. So So we did a trial to see if giving whole blood with everything in it was more effective, and we're awaiting the results of that right now. The other things we might have to do for patients is, I mentioned before, if you have a bad chest injury, if your ribs are all broken, they can puncture your lung and cause bleeding or air to get trapped in your chest cavity. That extra tension from the trapped air or blood can cause your lungs to collapse and then your heart to be compromised, and it can cause you to go into cardiac arrest. So one of the ways we can treat that is, you can see there's a medical knife which is called a scalpel on the top of the patient. We make smallish holes about 1 inch long in the side of the chest, and then we use these forceps to pop through the ribs, and we've helpfully got some skeletons here. You pop through the ribs, and then the idea is you just make a hole, you release the pressure, and then the lung is allowed to reinflate. And that means the oxygen you're putting in through the face mask or the tube then goes into the lungs, helps to circulate. So this is one of the interventions, again, that the paramedics on the ambulance service aren't allowed to do, but the doctors can, and the advanced paramedics can do this as well. And again, this can save someone's life or stop them going into cardiac arrest if we do that early enough. Right, if you are a bit squeamish, I'm guessing you probably wouldn't have come to this lecture if you were, but just in case you are, the next slide is pretty graphic of the inside of someone's chest. So if you don't want to look, or you don't like anatomy, please just close your eyes until I tell you to open them, okay? So, this is the most invasive thing we do to patients. I think you've all got your eyes open. Okay, good. So, this is what simply is called open chest surgery. Is everyone all right? Open chest surgery, or a thoracotomy. Its full name is an emergency resuscitative thoracotomy, because we're doing this to save someone's life. This is someone who's in cardiac arrest. It's often somebody who's been stabbed in the chest, and we think the knife has gone through to their heart. The heart has bled, and there is a clot and blood forming around the heart. The heart has a covering on the outside called the pericardium, and the clot and the liquid starts to create extra pressure so that the heart can't beat. Now, unless you release that by opening that sac around the heart will stop. In most cases that we start doing this, the heart has already stopped. So what we do is we make the holes in the side of the chest that I mentioned before, so in between the ribs, and then we cut with medical scissors across between the ribs and across the breastbone, the sternum. And we use medical equipment. We do this exactly like they do it in the operating theatre. But you probably noticed I didn't put surgery up as one of the skills. So we learn to do this, but we are trained to do it and we're allowed to do it. But we're not surgeons when we're working in the hospital. We do have one surgeon who works with us, but the rest of us learn to do this because we need to do it to save people's lives. So we cut between the ribs, we cut across the breastbone, we put in these rib spreaders. I don't know if this is is this a laser printer? Pointer, sorry. Yeah, there we go. So this thing is called a rib spreader, and this pulls the ribs apart so that we get this good view. And the reason we need to do that is because we want to see the whole heart. So these bits with the speckles are the lungs. And this was actually a 16-year-old who actually got shot. But these are his lungs. And this is the heart. And we've already cut the sac away from the outside of the heart. So you can see the nice pink bit. That's the muscle of the heart. This is one of the coronary blood vessels. His heart wasn't actually injured, but he had blood in his chest because he'd been shot on the left. It had gone up through the right of his diaphragm, and he had a lot of blood on the right side of his chest, actually, around here. This is my hand. This is a long time ago, this slide. This is my hand, and I'm pressing on the biggest blood vessel in the body, the aorta, which is behind the heart. And we do that so that when we give blood and try and make the heart pump, the blood is just going to the brain and the heart, which are the two most important organs. So we're trying to restart the heart and make sure that the brain is getting a blood supply. So by doing this intervention, we get about 20% of people back from cardiac arrest, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So we're taking someone who perhaps has been stabbed, their heart has stopped, we do this procedure, we can get their heart going again, we take them to hospital, and then hopefully they will have a good recovery. Okay, you can open your eyes if you close them. The other procedure we do, which is invasive, is called REBOA. That stands for resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. So the big blood vessel, I don't know, he's got one. He's probably got one underneath. But the the aorta is your biggest artery. And you can see it's this red blood vessel, which then splits off down at your pelvis and goes down your legs. But what we do is we go into your groin, on the left or the right, it doesn't matter. We put a needle in and then a wire in. Then on top of the wire, we put a catheter, and we thread the catheter up from the groin. We thread it up the aorta, and then we blow a balloon up. So obviously blood normally flows from the heart, comes down your aorta, goes to the blood vessels, goes to the organs, and your kidneys are sort of up here. But if we blow that balloon up, we cut the blood supply off below that. And the reason we do it is that if you've got a fractured pelvis or a problem in your tummy, we can stop you bleeding for a period of time by putting the balloon up. And then we can still give you blood and resuscitate your heart and your brain. This is a temporary procedure that we do. It then allows us to get the patient to hospital alive, and then they will need formal surgery and the balloon to be taken down. But this is the things we offer. So we had to do this on Vicky, the cyclist. So Dean and the team looking after her, they put this balloon in, they stopped the bleeding from her pelvis, took her to the Royal London, having a blood transfusion, and then she went to the operating theatre. This is a picture of our team, and you can see how much kit they've got. This is Claire and James, they've been on a job, and you can sort of see they've obviously been working hard, they've got lots of kit, but they had just done that procedure on somebody, which is pretty amazing. And I think, based on the title of the lecture, this demonstrates that actually we can take the hospital to the patient, and it's important that we can do so. So you'll recognise this. This is the big blue building just over the road, which has obviously got very strong affiliations with Queen Mary's University. And a lot of our doctors also work for the university, and our lecturers or professors. And a lot of the work that happens at the university translates into how we look after patients in the hospital. So all the research that's gone on helps us actually provide better care for people. This is the resuscitation room in the Royal London Emergency Department, which is where I work when I'm not on the helicopter. And you can just see the number of people that are ready and waiting when we bring a patient in. So this is the response to something called Code Red, which is a pre-alert we use for patients who are bleeding and who, like Vicky, who are badly injured. You can see how many doctors, how many nurses and therapists there are all ready to receive this patient. And when we put that pre-alert in, people come from every bit of the hospital, in the lifts, down the stairs, they assemble, we put on protective equipment like lead aprons so that we can take x-rays, we can do ultrasounds, we can give blood transfusions, and we can do all of the things that I've just told you the air ambulance do. But for some patients, if we waited to this point, it would be too late. So again, it's really important that the air ambulance exists, the cars, the aircraft, and the medical teams, because otherwise some patients will not make it to hospital. So we do that probably, as I say, about 5 times a day. So on the helicopter, you know, sometimes we've had much busier days, could be 12 jobs a day, but the average is 6. At the end of our 12-hour shift, we then hand over to the next team. So always there is at least one London's Air Ambulance team in London on call to respond to whatever is needed. But we hand over to each other. We have a structured way of doing that handover so we don't miss any information, and we'll report on people, the right kit, we'll make sure the cars have got enough fuel in them, and we talk, if there's any problems, we always try and find solutions. And then the next team will log on and be ready to go and do the same thing again. And that just keeps happening on repeat. The most important thing, though, is patience. And the lady I've been talking a bit about is Vicky. This is her. She's the lady you saw who was very pale. She was a cyclist injured in Clerkenwell. She had the Reboa procedure and the blood transfusion. This is her in the Royal London Hospital with her family. And you can see that she's still pretty pale, but she's better, but it's a very long recovery. So it's not just about your time in hospital, but to recover back to where you were before, whether you're trying to go back to school, to work, to have a normal family life, or go back to your hobbies. Just the medical treatment isn't enough. You need rehabilitation, you need psychological support, and that's a very long journey for patients. So we try not to just leave our patients alone, and we have patient liaison nurses who are employed by the charity, and they go and visit our patients as we do, and they provide support for the families. This is a man called Zoltan that I looked after. He's a construction manager, and he was working. He's actually walking along the street at lunchtime, going to get his sandwich, and a van came out of nowhere and smashed him against some railings. He went through the railings and fell down into a basement in front of a house. His leg was very badly injured, and you can just about see he had to have his leg amputated. And you can imagine for a lot of people, he was married with 2 small daughters who is about 5. And you might think, gosh, my life is over, I've lost my leg, things are never going to be the same. But actually for him, he went on to ride a bike up a very steep hill near where I live in Sussex. He's gone back to playing football. He's pretty incredible, and he came to visit us on the helipad. And he's a really good advert or example of just how people can recover. And with good rehabilitation and psychological support and a good family, you can actually go back to enjoying the things that you enjoyed before. But that takes a lot of hard work on behalf of the patient and the supporting community. So London's Air Ambulance as a charity tries to support this with the patient liaison nurses. I mentioned our handover, so this is really like handing the baton over to the next team. So we finish our shift, like hospital doctors and paramedics, we have to do documentation. We record all of our records and we hand them over to the hospital. We do any research paperwork. We put people into research trials with the support of the university and the hospital. We upload our observations into an electronic system. We do safeguarding for patients who are vulnerable that we've looked after. And as I said, we follow them up and we have lots of checks to do. And then we go home and people rest or recover in whatever way is right for them. Some people like to go for a run. Some people like a glass of wine and Netflix. But people do whatever they need to recover. But they always have the supporting team at London's Air Ambulance to look after them if they ever need that. So I hope that we've given you a flavour of what London's Air Ambulance does. I hope as people who live, work, commute in London, you feel looked after by the fact that this service exists, because I'm certainly very proud to work for it. And I know that if I was badly injured in London, it would be there for me, along with the rest of the London Major Trauma System and all the hospitals. But every doctor and paramedic who works for this service has wanted to do this job for a long time. It's usually a long-held ambition. They've worked very hard to get there. And we're very proud of the care that we can deliver. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to come and give this talk. We're very happy to take some questions. But thanks for your support. If you've got anything you want to ask, please feel free. Thanks.